been an incredibly hot summer here, extremely hot for our area. It usually, very rarely has it ever got any humidity here, which is very nice. You know, we've got air conditioning in the house that we have rarely turned on. Sometimes, one or two times, we've gone an entire summer without actually using it. And sometimes we'll use it 2 or 3 days here and there over the course of a summer. But it's been in the 90 plus degrees here, which is in the mid to high 30 Celsius for several weeks now, probably close to 6 weeks. We have generally we have frost coming by, you know, that first week or so of September, and we don't get the last frost until, you know, sort of the first to middle week of June. So we have a short summer, and it rarely ever gets very hot, but it's been just gruesome. On top of that, we've had almost no rain, and I've heard other people on YouTube saying the same thing, that you know, on even in Europe and places, they're having, you know, outstandingly hot summers. So it's just the way it is, I guess, this year, and it seems to be more or less worldwide. But one of the things that causes is that you know, we have a fire ban here, and that's again something that never happens around here generally. And also the natural foods in the forest. You know, we're going to go out here in a second for a walk, and you know, the raspberry bushes just have little dried nubbins on them, and you know, and everything else is just you know, just not fruiting and coming along as it should be. So let's go and have a look at a couple of these things and see what we've got. This has been an absolutely incredibly dry and extremely humid summer, and we haven't had rain in probably, it must be 6 weeks. It's just, and I've heard other YouTubers from all over certainly the northern part of the world, Sweden, Denmark, other places, England. Now when the Englands don't get rain for several weeks, you know the climate's really suffering a little bit, because they're a pretty rainy place. Here we are, it's the end of July, and these seed pods here, get in here a little bit, are lupins. Not unusual, but if you notice here, if I can get, I don't know how close this will focus, but you see those seed pods, get out of my own light, are open. It means they've dropped their seeds already, obviously. And here we are, only the end of July. Now here's some that haven't. There we go, it's a little better group. There's some there that are still coming on, but there's a whole mass of them here. A whole mass. It's a little moisture here in the edge of the bush, because you know, there's more shadow to retain what moisture there can be. But 95% of these plants or more are all not only gone to seed, but the seed pods have already opened. That's very unusual when it's only the last week of July. You know, those things shouldn't be doing this for another nearly a month. Just another of the many indications that things are extremely tough here as far as how dry it is. And you know, as I say, there's a fire ban here, which is the first time I've ever seen that. You know, we can't light fires, we can't really do a lot of things that you would normally do out in the bushes, even for cooking. Normally you're allowed to at least have a cooking fire almost any time, but even that's banned now. So it's a tough summer. As we can see here, the water line is down probably close to 3 feet in these little bush ponds, beaver ponds, and so on. And that's crazy for this time of year. You just never see it like that. There are little patches like this. As you can see, we're pretty much in the forest here. And again, it holds the moisture, so you can see that there are little bits and pieces, patches of raspberries, but the majority of them are like this, just dried out little nubbins. There's not much to them, and you know, at this time of year they should be pretty much on the go. There's the odd one that we can take. Try that. Well, they're sweet enough, more or less. Not quite as much as they might normally be, but what this means is that the wildlife that depends on these things, look at this, look at these, are just about burned up in here. They're just little dried out bits. And this right here are little bits of Labrador tea. So that's not too bad. That looks reasonably green and growing. There'll be some tea leaves here for us in the fall, or now for that matter. Actually, there's a fair bit of it here. You can see it all down through here and up here. So raspberries and berries are in decline, but the Labrador tea, now that's not going to help the wildlife much, but it'll be all right for me. Okay, I've been following down the side of a logging road here for probably about 3 or 4 kilometers, and finally a small bunch of raspberries. And this little batch of them here, it's a pretty good batch actually. There's some few dry ones on here as well. But this is the first decent batch of raspberries that I've come across in 3 or 4 kilometers. I should have been able to fill a bushel basket with these things in that distance. That's going to be tough on the wildlife as far as fattening up for the cold weather and getting some energy stores put together. Tough going. This is a little clump of probably a dozen bushes of Saskatoon berries. Some people call them service berries, and it's basically the same thing as is to be expected. It's the same thing as the raspberries. There's very little here, a lot of bugs. It's all dry. There's just very few. Now I wouldn't expect them to be overly ripe yet. That's not surprising. But they're just dried out. There's not much, even when they start to ripen, there's not going to be, I'll bring this around and show you. Okay, let me get down here. You can see that, I think you can. They're starting to darken up a little bit. That's not too bad, but they're not ripe yet. But you see this one here. That's just a dried up little husk. There's no hope for that guy. He's not gonna ever, and there's not very many of them. I've come here in the past years, there's a pretty nice one. I've come here in the past years and harvested quite a few of these. There's a number of these clumps spread, throughout this area. They're fairly native here. And I've harvested a lot of them, and they make a nice preserve, or again, just berries to have with a dish of berries or on your cereal or something. But bit dry again, kind of seedy. Only the slightest bit of sweetness. Not a lot of flavor to them. They're just pretty dry. It's like fruit jerky. This is going to have a pretty profound effect on the wildlife that normally comes through these areas. And there's areas like this all over here. And mostly natural made. And as I said, the bears and the grouse and everybody pretty much sets up shop around these things in the fall and gets that last little bit of stuff before winter comes. But it's not looking too good this year. Make it better for the hunters, I guess. The animals will be on the move more. Bear season starts in just over 2 weeks, and I'm starting to get ready for that. So, but you hunt the food sources. It's going to be harder to do that now because they're either more concentrated, which might be a good thing, but there's little enough of it, which is definitely a bad thing. So it'll be interesting to see what that means this year. We rely on a bear or two for our freezer for the meat, so I'm not a trophy hunter. I have no desire to take a life just to hang something on the wall, but we do fill our freezer with the wild game and fish that we can get. Up here, it's a long way to get any supplies, you know, that you have to travel for. We have to go an 80-90 kilometer round trip to the nearest village where we can even get gas for the vehicles or anything at all. That's the closest place to get anything. And to a larger community where there's a bit of a selection of actual shopping is about 215 or 220 kilometers one way. So by the time you drive around that town a little bit, you know, you're talking nearly a 500-kilometer round trip or pretty close to it. So we get what we can off the land. It's not a matter of so-called prepping or whatever. It's just the way people live when they live in places like this. It's been like this for centuries and it doesn't change. The needs are the same. But one thing that we do have in a huge abundance up here are wild roses. And they are everywhere by the thousands. And there's a whole, well, here's a clump of them, but normally they're just constant. There's not really even clumps, they're just everywhere. It wasn't a great flowering time this year for the same drought type reasons, but they're everywhere. They're everywhere you look. Thousands upon thousands, and when they're in bloom, excuse me, and the wild roses don't bloom for very long, just a week or two, but when they're in bloom, this whole field and all the fields around here that are open are just a riot of pink flowers, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Smells pretty nice too. Okay, the thing that we have that grows in abundance the most here are the black flies, deer flies, moose flies, and the gnats. And you know, you come home, I'm killing them right now, you come home bloody every time you come out here. And even though I put bug spray on or lotion, it lasts only for a short. You get, especially this year, you get perspiring, and you know it doesn't last forever. As far as trees go here, the black spruce is probably one of the most predominant. There's white spruce, whoops, tamarack, which some people call larch in certain areas. There's some birch, a lot of poplar. That's really what we have here. Some various fir, but mostly it's the spruces, the tamarack, and the poplar, and a few birch. There's quite a few birch, but they're not by anywhere near dominant by any stretch. But there's always, you know, there's spruce tip tea, and there's a lot of wild edibles, even though in this particular area where we are, if we were even just 500 miles south or even 200 or 300 kilometers south, there'd be a lot more wild edibles, because we're just over that line where a lot of things like the maples and the oaks and all the mast crops, they don't grow here. And because of that, also we don't get deer here, we get moose. There's a lot of wolves and coyotes, lynx, there's wolverines, wolves, you know, all that kind of thing. As far as meat trapping or meat hunting, there's bear, moose. If you want to go for deer, you've got to travel 300 or 400 kilometers to go south to where they are, where they exist. And they exist where the trees are that provide the mast crops. But beaver, muskrat, things like that. And you know, you have to have a trapping license if you want to go for the beaver and the muskrat, but or have a friend who has a trapping license who'll give you the meat. But it's very good eating, you know, and there's, you know, lots of it. So that's great. Another thing that we're getting here, and I can see it right here. I should have mentioned it earlier when I mentioned the rose plants, because as I said, there are just thousands of them here. But we also get the rose hips. Where you get rose plants, you get rose hips. And they seem to be, that's a bit small, but it's starting to get some color to it. So it looks like we'll have a semi-decent crop of that. So if you get a bit of everything, there won't be an abundance, but between the variety of things that we can get, we'll you know, we'll get something for the winter. It won't be, man, I'm getting eaten alive here. It won't be a lot, but it'll give us a nice taste treat for just for a change from time to time.